Wait, Chris Paul wants $100 million? This was a bit of a weird headline that came out this past couple of days where it became really clear that Chris Paul plans on declining his player option for this offseason and exploring a contract in the range of 3 years and $100 million. That raised a lot of people's eyebrows. I think a lot of people expected him to opt into his option. There's a lot of different angles on this. It's something I've been thinking about for weeks, honestly, at this point, and that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. Quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload every single day on this channel. It's the most consistent NBA content on YouTube. If you're new here, by the way, what's up? My name is Tucker. If you're enjoying the video, be sure to leave a like rating on it. It helps me out a ton, helps get the video out to more people on YouTube. And if you want to hang out with me outside of these videos, check out the social link down in the description below. With those things said, let's talk about this Chris Paul free agency stuff. So people are kind of anticipating this offseason in terms of free agency not being especially exciting. We're really pushing the Kawhi narrative, hoping that Kawhi ends up wanting to leave. We're really pushing now this Chris Paul narrative that he is going to opt out, potentially go somewhere else outside of Phoenix. But there's a couple of interesting things here, and then we'll get into kind of the big points here on the Chris Paul possible extension, new deal, whatever. Yeah, I find it interesting that the number in the report was so specific because this report comes out and everybody's like, oh yeah, he's looking for something in the 3-year, $100 million range. That makes me think that there's already been discussions because how are you already so precise about what you're looking for? This happened a couple years ago with Al Horford, where there was already numbers kind of floating around about what he could possibly get, and then it was really, really close to what he ended up getting in Philadelphia, which makes me think there have been conversations, probably, unless there's a lot of tampering involved here, involving the Phoenix Suns. The other part of this is that this report came out a couple of days ago, but I've been reading and listening to things on podcasts indicating, again, 3 years, $100 million, like 3 weeks ago. And subsequently, over the last couple of weeks, I've been seeing things about that outside of just this report that came out this most recent week, which is really, really interesting how specific you can be about those details. But for the number itself and for Paul's free agency, there's a couple of big questions. One, does this make sense for Chris Paul to opt out of his option and look for a long-term deal? 2, where could he possibly go? And 3, does it make sense for Phoenix specifically to bring him back and re-sign him? We'll go through this question by question. First of all, does it make sense for him to opt out of a $40+ million player option and explore a long-term deal? Yes, absolutely. Even with some of the quote-unquote struggles he's had at times in this postseason due to injury, even due to his age, even the fact that he is a smaller guard, he is going to get that level of money. I would be surprised if he doesn't get at least $80 million, $90 million over 3 years and potentially $100 million over 3 years in this offseason. This is a guy that has proven his value time and time again. He continues to lift up every single franchise that he goes to, makes them a winning team, and teams see a value in that. And is Chris Paul going to be worth $35 million annually 2 years from now? Probably not. But if he's worth it for the first year and a half and he makes your team a contender when he gets there, or if he potentially stays in Phoenix and continues to make them a contender, that's kind of worth it. You just kind of accept that, yeah, we might overpay him in the final year of the deal, but we get Chris Paul for 3 years. So absolutely, I think he can earn this level of money, and it's smart. Maybe you get 40 next year, but then maybe you get hurt or you don't have as good of a season and your value drops dramatically. But if you can go into this offseason where it's basically just you and Kawhi as the big-time free agents and nobody really knows what Kawhi is going to end up doing and potentially leaving the Clippers, if that's the scenario, then absolutely he can go out and get his money, and he should, especially for an older guy that's dealt with some injury issues. Get that long-term money, get the long-term security, get more money over a couple of years rather than just one big, huge number, because this is probably the last deal he's going to be signing in the NBA. The second question, where could Chris Paul potentially go? Well, when it comes to big-time free agency teams, there's 2 to look at outside of Phoenix here. It's the Miami Heat and it's the New York Knicks. It's the same teams that we've been talking about for Kawhi as well. We'll begin with the Heat. It's not that it doesn't make sense. I just kind of feel like for Miami, where they have to kind of maneuver some of these cap hold situations and they kind of have to figure out where they want to go moving forward, it just seems like an odd fit. It seems like it would obviously help them, but are they like necessarily ready to make a jump after a disappointing year? The Miami thing just feels very up in the air, and I feel like they would more quickly just go after a guy that's a sure thing like Kawhi, or as they were planning for a couple of years, Giannis, rather than being like, hey, Chris Paul, here's $100 million. I don't really have an explanation for why the Miami thing doesn't make sense. It just doesn't feel like that's the fit. The one that's interesting to me is New York. The Knicks are an increasingly popular free agency destination. I think a lot of players are going to be looking at the way Madison Square Garden looked during that playoff run for a Knicks team that, by the way, only won one playoff game, but it felt like they had won 3 series if you listen to that crowd. The draw of playing in Madison Square Garden for the Knicks, I don't think has ever been bigger in terms of free agency than it is right now, at least not in the last 10 years. And Chris Paul could look at that team and say, hey, they really need a point guard. Tibbs is a good coach. They're going to be able to guard. They're going to have shooters. They're going to have an opportunity critically to bring in someone else where Paul can sign there. They've got those future Dallas picks. They've got young guys. If Paul has another guy he wants to play with, he can call them up and say, hey, what do you think about going to New York? And I know that he likes playing with Devin Booker, and I know that he likes playing in Phoenix, and he chose to go to Phoenix. He advocated to go there in trade discussions last offseason. But if for some reason this Suns run ends in a way that he doesn't like, or we have some big issues, or they're just not willing to pay him, New York is a very, very interesting option because there's just that draw now where they're a competent franchise. They're doing the correct things. They've got options. And if there's another player that he's like, hey, I would really like to play with whoever in New York, they're going to be able to do that. They have the assets to potentially make that happen depending on what they're willing to give up. However, as we move into the third question here, meaning does it make sense for Phoenix to re-sign Chris Paul? All the tea leaves, everything you can kind of read into here to me says Chris Paul is going to stay in Phoenix, and they've already had discussions on an extension for a couple of different reasons. One, the specificity of multiple reports from multiple different places saying the exact same thing. Over a span of a few weeks, when this conversation about him declining his option started to become a bit more relevant and talked about, every time I've heard it talked about, everybody has said 3 years, $100 million, 3 years, $100 million. And again, unless there's some crazy tampering stuff going on, which I wouldn't put past anybody in the NBA, that to me seems like him and Phoenix have already had conversations, and he has kind of indicated to them, hey, I like being here. I like playing with Devin Booker with a second seed in the West where you almost had the best record of the entire league. I'd like to stay here. Here's what I'm planning on doing, just a heads up. And so to me, it feels like they're kind of on the same page. The only way in which I could see Chris Paul potentially going somewhere else would be if somehow the Suns playoff run ends in absolute disaster. They get destroyed by a team they shouldn't. They get swept or they lose in 5 games to a team they shouldn't. And it just creates a really, really bad situation. And or Phoenix isn't willing to pay him what he would like to be paid, while the Knicks or potentially the Heat are willing to give him that 3 years, 100. Whereas Phoenix is looking at it and thinking, well, he's getting older. He had an injury issue in the postseason. Are we really willing to pay this guy? Now, does it make sense for Phoenix to re-sign him to, let's just use a 3 years, $100 million example. He's making about $33 million annually. It's the exact same thing that I mentioned with the Knicks or any of the other teams. Is Chris Paul going to be worth that number in 2 years? It's unlikely. But you just got the second seed in the West, second best record in the entire league. You just beat the Lakers in the first round of the postseason. It makes a lot of sense to just go for it. And if Chris Paul is overpaid in 2 years, then he's overpaid in 2 years. But if you're a contender in the first and the second year of the deal, then why does it matter? Why would you just look at this situation and say, you know what? Yeah, we were really good this year. We were contenders, but we'll just let Chris Paul walk. It's fine. We'll figure it out. You haven't had a good team in a handful of years. You haven't had a team this successful in a very, very long time. I don't think Phoenix is just going to take that lightly and just say, well, Chris, we'd really like to only pay you about 25 a year over the next couple of years. If you want 33, then just go play for the Knicks. I can't imagine a scenario in which that's going to happen. Now, granted, Phoenix historically, under this owner specifically, has shown a tendency to be a bit frugal, cheap, you could even say. And so if it comes down to it, and the owner's like, no, I don't want to pay Chris Paul that could be a significant issue to this. I will definitely admit that. But I can't imagine a scenario in which Chris Paul leaves Phoenix because of something that Phoenix did. If for some reason he just sees a better opportunity elsewhere, then that makes sense. But ultimately, what I'm thinking is he's going to decline this option. He's going to accept a contract somewhere around the 3-year, $100 million range, and everybody's going to be like, wow, that's really good reporting. It's because it's basically something they've already discussed, and he's going to stay in Phoenix. Barring any kind of crazy unforeseen thing, I think this makes sense for Chris. I think it makes sense for Phoenix, and the other teams that could potentially go out and get him are interesting, specifically the Knicks with the opportunity to then make a trade with those future Dallas picks, but ultimately, it's just too mutually beneficial to both Phoenix and Chris Paul for him to stay. They're an awesome team. They're really good. He chose to go there a year ago. He had to convince Phoenix, hey, I would really like to play with y'all. I'd really like to play with Devin Booker, and it has worked. And Phoenix is invested in him from a future asset standpoint. They gave up, some pieces last offseason to retain him. You're not just going to let him walk the following year. I think he's staying, but I do think he's declining this option and getting his long-term money, and all those things I think make absolutely perfect sense with the way we treat NBA free agency now. But yeah, that's going to be the end of today's video. Let me know down in the comment section what you guys think about what Phoenix should do, what Chris Paul should do, and a potential prediction on where he could possibly go. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like rating on it. You can check me out at various socials and a Linktree link down in the description below, as well as more boxes. There's boxes on the screen for more videos just like this. And yeah, consider subscribing if you're enjoying the content. With all those things said, hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.